A real estate agent called me to ask if I still wanted to schedule a walkthrough of my family's property before the new owners take possession, and I told her she had the wrong number because our family's farm wasn't for sale. She read back the address, the parcel number, and the seller's name on the closing documents. The seller was my brother. He had sold our late grandfather's 120-acre farm 3 weeks earlier, a property our entire family co-owned, and had never told a single one of us it was even listed. My name is Brett, and this is the story of how my brother quietly, deliberately sold a piece of land that belonged to 5 different family members, kept the entire proceeds for himself, and very nearly got away with it completely, if not for a single misdialed phone call from a real estate agent who assumed I already knew. I want to explain what this farm actually meant to our family, because I think understanding that depth of significance matters to understanding just how devastating this betrayal ultimately became. My grandfather, Walter, bought this land over 50 years ago, built a life on it, raised my father and his 3 siblings there, and, upon his death 6 years ago, left it jointly to his 5 surviving children and grandchildren through a carefully structured trust arrangement, specifically designed, according to the estate attorney who'd helped him set it up, to keep the land in the family for future generations rather than risk it being sold off and divided. I remember, specifically, spending nearly every childhood summer at that farm, learning to fish in the pond my grandfather had stocked decades earlier, helping with small chores during the fall harvest celebration that became an annual family tradition. I remember my grandfather, during one of our last conversations before he passed, telling me directly how much it mattered to him that the land stay in the family, that he'd structured the trust specifically to prevent any single person from ever being able to sell it off without everyone else's agreement. I carry that specific memory now with particular weight, understanding how completely his intentions were ultimately violated. The trust structure, established through my grandfather's estate planning, designated 5 co-trustees with equal ownership interest: my father, his 2 surviving siblings, my cousin Danielle, and my older brother, Tyler, who had been included specifically because he was the only grandchild who had expressed genuine, ongoing interest in eventually working the land himself. An arrangement my grandfather had apparently decided reflected fairness given how much more involved Tyler had been in helping maintain the property throughout his final years. I want to describe what this farm actually looked like in practice throughout the 6 years following my grandfather's death, because I think the specific, functional way our family had continued using and maintaining the property together matters to understanding how completely unexpected this eventual betrayal actually was. We held family gatherings there several times a year: 4th of July, an annual fall harvest celebration that had become something of a family tradition, occasional weekend visits from various family members who used the old farmhouse as a kind of shared family retreat. Tyler had, over these 6 years, taken on the most direct, ongoing responsibility for the property's daily maintenance, living roughly 20 minutes away and handling the practical work of keeping the farmhouse maintained, managing a small amount of active farming on part of the acreage, and generally serving as the family's primary point of contact for anything related to the property's condition and upkeep. I want to describe the specific arrangement our family had developed regarding decisions about the property, an informal but consistently honored practice where any significant decision, major repairs, changes to how the land was used, any consideration of selling any portion of it, required discussion and agreement among all 5 co-trustees. Even though Tyler's daily involvement meant he typically initiated these conversations and provided the practical recommendations the rest of us usually deferred to. Given his considerably more direct, hands-on knowledge of the property's actual condition and needs, I received that devastating phone call from the real estate agent on an entirely ordinary Tuesday afternoon, roughly 6 months ago, expecting, when I saw an unfamiliar number, simply another routine call I could quickly dispense with before returning to my workday. "Hi, this is Karen from Heartland Realty. I'm following up about your family's farm property. Wanted to confirm you're still planning to attend the walkthrough before the new owners take possession next week." I want to describe the specific, disorienting confusion of that opening statement, genuinely believing, for the first several seconds, that this call must represent some kind of mistaken identity or wrong number, given that I had absolutely no knowledge of our family farm being listed for sale, let alone already sold with new owners preparing to take possession. "I think you have the wrong family," I said, still operating under the assumption that this represented an ordinary administrative error rather than anything more significant. "Our farm isn't for sale." Karen, after a brief pause to verify details on her end, read back the exact property address, the parcel number matching our family's land precisely, along with the seller's name listed on the closing documents: Tyler Hendricks, my own brother. I want to try to describe the specific, vertiginous shock of hearing this information, understanding, in real time, that my brother had apparently sold our grandfather's farm, land jointly owned by 5 family members through a carefully structured trust specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral sale, without informing a single one of us that this process was even underway. I called Tyler immediately after hanging up with Karen, my hands shaking as I dialed a number I'd called countless times throughout our entire lives as brothers. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice carrying an immediate, telling wariness that suggested he understood exactly why I was calling before I even said anything. "Tyler, I just got a call from a real estate agent about the farm being sold. Please tell me that's some kind of mistake." I remember standing in my kitchen during this call, my other hand gripping the counter as though I needed something solid to hold onto while processing what was unfolding. I remember the specific, telling quality of the silence that followed my question, several seconds stretching out long enough that I understood, before Tyler said anything, that whatever came next would confirm my worst fears rather than resolve them. The silence on his end of that call stretched long enough that I genuinely understood, before he said anything substantive, that whatever explanation followed wouldn't be the reassuring correction I desperately needed to hear. "I can explain," he finally said, his voice carrying a strange, resigned quality. "I know I should have told everyone sooner. It just got complicated, and I kept putting off the conversation. I want to describe the following devastating conversation." Tyler slowly, reluctantly revealing that he had, in fact, sold our grandfather's entire 120-acre farm roughly 3 weeks earlier, a sale that had apparently been in process for several months before that, without any of the rest of us having the slightest awareness this was happening. "How is this even legally possible?" I asked, my voice rising as the full scope of what he was describing continued to crystallize. "This is a trust with 5 co-trustees. You can't just unilaterally sell trust property without the rest of us agreeing to it." Tyler's explanation, delivered over the following exhausting conversation, revealed a legal mechanism I hadn't previously understood existed within our grandfather's original trust documentation, one that Tyler had apparently discovered and specifically exploited to make this unilateral sale possible. According to a specific provision buried within the trust's original language, any co-trustee holding what was designated as primary operational responsibility for the property, a role Tyler had held for years given his hands-on management of the farm's daily needs, held individual authority to execute a sale under specific circumstances involving the property's ongoing financial sustainability, without requiring unanimous consent from all co-trustees. I want to describe the specific, devastating discovery that followed, working with a trust attorney to understand exactly how this provision functioned and whether Tyler's use of it had actually been legally valid. The attorney I consulted, a careful, experienced woman named Ms. Delgado, reviewed the original trust documentation and confirmed that this provision did technically exist, though she noted, with visible concern, that its specific language required demonstrating genuine financial necessity, evidence that the property had become financially unsustainable to maintain without a sale. A standard Tyler's actual documented justification for the sale seemed to only partially, questionably satisfy. I want to describe what Tyler ultimately claimed as his justification for invoking this provision, an explanation that revealed additional layers of concerning behavior beyond simply the sale itself. He explained that he had, over the preceding 2 years, personally covered increasingly significant property tax increases and maintenance costs that the rest of the family hadn't been contributing toward, expenses he claimed had grown unsustainable for him to continue absorbing alone, ultimately justifying, in his own understanding, his decision to sell rather than continue what he characterized as an increasingly one-sided financial burden. I want to try to describe the specific, layered complexity of processing this justification, understanding that if Tyler genuinely had been shouldering disproportionate financial responsibility for the property's maintenance without adequate family support or acknowledgement, this represented a legitimate grievance that should have been addressed through direct, honest conversation among all the co-trustees, rather than resolved through a unilateral, secret sale that entirely excluded the rest of us from both the decision-making process and, more devastatingly, from any share of the proceeds. I want to describe learning the actual sale price and understanding how Tyler had distributed, or rather failed to distribute, the resulting proceeds. The farm had sold for just over $840,000, a sum that, split 5 ways according to the trust's original ownership structure, should have provided each co-trustee with roughly $168,000. Tyler, according to what I eventually confirmed through the closing documentation, had kept the entire proceeds for himself, characterizing this, when I finally confronted him directly about the money specifically, as reasonable compensation for years of disproportionate financial contribution toward the property's maintenance that the rest of the family hadn't adequately acknowledged or shared. I want to describe the difficult, extended process our family underwent following this devastating discovery, involving formal legal action against Tyler to recover our respective shares of the sale proceeds. A process that, given the clear ownership structure documented in the original trust, despite Tyler's specific provision-based justification for the sale itself, ultimately proved considerably more successful than the co-signed loan situations or other family financial disputes often prove to be. Ms. Delgado's legal analysis ultimately concluded that while the specific provision Tyler had invoked did provide him limited authority to execute the sale itself without unanimous consent, nothing in the trust language authorized him to retain the entire proceeds rather than distributing them according to the established ownership percentages. This distinction proved legally significant, allowing our family to pursue a considerably more straightforward legal claim for the improperly withheld proceeds, separate from the more legally complex question of whether the sale itself had been properly authorized. I want to describe the extended family meeting, involving all the remaining co-trustees, that took place roughly 6 weeks after this discovery, a genuinely difficult gathering during which we collectively decided how to proceed regarding both the legal recovery of our proceeds and the deeper question of Tyler's continued relationship with the rest of our family going forward. I want to describe my father's specific reaction throughout this entire process, watching my own father navigate profound hurt and disappointment regarding his own son's actions, understanding that Tyler's betrayal touched not just the practical financial question of the proceeds, but the deeper, more painful reality of watching a child make choices that so thoroughly violated both legal trust and basic family loyalty. The legal proceedings against Tyler ultimately concluded roughly 8 months after the original discovery, resulting in a court-ordered distribution requiring Tyler to pay each of the remaining 4 co-trustees their proper share of the sale proceeds, plus accumulated interest for the period the funds had been improperly withheld, a process that required Tyler to liquidate various personal assets given that he'd apparently already spent a significant portion of the original proceeds before the legal proceedings concluded. I want to describe the specific, ongoing complexity of our family's relationship with Tyler in the aftermath of this entire situation, a rupture that, unlike some of the financial disputes I've since learned other families navigate, hasn't shown significant signs of eventual repair, given both the scope of the original deception and Tyler's continued, only partial acknowledgement of the full harm his actions caused. I want to be honest about my own difficult process of understanding how a brother I'd trusted throughout my entire life could make a decision this calculated and deceptive, understanding that Tyler's own account of feeling underappreciated for his ongoing property management, whatever legitimacy it might have held, never justified the specific choice to secretly sell shared family property and then attempt to keep the entire proceeds without any of the rest of us even knowing the sale had occurred. It's been just over 14 months since that initial devastating phone call from Karen at Heartland Realty. Our family has, collectively, processed the practical financial resolution of this situation, each of us having eventually received our proper share of the proceeds, though the actual property itself, our grandfather's farm, the physical place that had anchored so many family gatherings and memories across generations, remains permanently gone, sold to new owners we've never met, now inaccessible to a family that had assumed, incorrectly, that its trust-protected ownership structure would keep it within our family for generations to come. I think, often, about the specific cruelty of losing not just money, but an irreplaceable physical connection to our shared family history, understanding that even with the financial proceeds eventually recovered through legal action, no court order could actually restore our access to the land itself. The farmhouse where 4 generations of our family had gathered, now belonging entirely to strangers because my own brother decided his individual financial grievances justified secretly, permanently taking that shared inheritance away from the rest of us. If you've ever discovered that a family member had secretly, unilaterally disposed of shared property or assets without your knowledge or consent, I want to hear how you navigated both the legal recovery process and the much deeper question of family trust that this kind of betrayal inevitably raises. I used to believe that a carefully structured trust, specifically designed by my grandfather to protect this property for future generations, represented a genuinely secure, protected arrangement, immune to exactly this kind of unilateral, secretive action by any single family member. I've learned, in the most painful way possible, that even the most carefully designed legal protections can contain vulnerabilities that a sufficiently determined, dishonest family member can discover and exploit. and that sometimes the people we trust most completely with our shared family legacy are exactly the ones capable of quietly, deliberately taking it away from everyone else.